Good day, everyone. This is our agricultural policy project, and today we'll be having a very important discussion along the lines of law, policy making and implementation, and agriculture. But before we proceed, it is pertinent to at least give or make brief introduction. So I am Busayo Bakari, and with me is Dr. Peter Oniemola. He is a legal practitioner and a lecturer at the University of Ibadan, Nigeria. He's also a research fellow at the Center for Energy, Economics and Law. So, Dr. Peter, sir, if you just help me expatiate that introduction, so if you could just tell me a few things about you, sir.
I'm a legal practitioner and a consultant. I'm also a lecturer in the Faculty of Law, University of Ibadan, Nigeria. So I've consulted in the area of agriculture, climate change, and sustainable development.
Awesome. So I think you would agree with me that law, policy making, and agriculture, they are really important concepts in the development of any country, and these concepts are quite connected in some way. So, sir, could you help us highlight the connection between these concepts, between agriculture, law, and policy making?
Agriculture is very important in any country. So for development of a country to be achieved, for the various policies of government to be achieved, then agriculture must be promoted. And in promoting agriculture, it is expedient that policies are put in place as expressing the government intentions as well as guides on what the government intends to achieve in the promotion of agriculture. And this must take into consideration the preeminent importance of agriculture. To achieve this requires that the law sets it in motion. So no matter how laudable a policy may be, if there is no law to back it up, then it's just an ordinary document that can be expressed as just a statement of intent. So usually the law should be or set out the framework for the implementation and realization of the goals of agricultural policy.
Thank you very much, sir. So on that one you mentioned that without law, a policy is as good as a document. So I think at this point it will be right, it will be apt to bring up the Maputo Declaration, the African Union Maputo Declaration of 2003. So that declaration states that every federal government must allocate at least 10% of its revenue or in its budget to agriculture. And Nigeria signed up on that declaration in 2004. And this is where like the 2021 budget is at its second reading at the Senate, and only 1.73% has been allocated to agriculture. So it is safe to say in that sense that the Maputo Declaration is only a statement of intent, has only been a statement of intent for about 16 years now, not like the government has tried to implement it. So what in that kind of situation, and several other declarations that have aided agriculture, so in such situation, what are the legal frameworks that could be put together to make sure that policies like this that aid the development of agriculture and the implementation of policies? So what kind of frameworks can be put in place to establish the implementation of these policies?
Yes, looking at the Maputo Declaration, as one can see, it's also a document. And again, it does not really have a binding effect because it is not an international law instrument like a treaty that has a binding effect. It's rather a declaration, and I can also refer to it as a statement of intent by the international community to project and promote agriculture. So, but it behoves on nations to translate such intents into law. As you would rightly know, or as we should appreciate, that there is a lawmaking process in Nigeria, there is a process of appropriation, there is a process of budgeting in line with the provisions of the Constitution. And again, the National Assembly cannot go out, likewise the Executive cannot go out of the provisions of the Constitution regarding the allocation of revenue or distribution of the country's revenue. In order to achieve that, there may be a need to put in place a specific legislation mandating the allocation of a marking specific amounts to the promotion of agriculture. So by so doing, that will create a legal duty or an obligation on the government to continue to promote agriculture. There are other ways which the government can secure this. One is through mandating the various agencies to mainstream matters bordering on agriculture as part of their mandates. And again, a way to do this is to promote incentives for agriculture, such as a series of waivers, tax waivers, and again reduction of certain duties or fees that farmers or persons who engage in agriculture would have ordinarily been made to pay. So in order to bring down the cost of agricultural production.
Thank you very much, sir. So on that note, you mentioned things that activities that will aid the development of agricultural policy implementation. So I'd like to mention a few of them. So in Kano State, for recent, the Kano State government invested about 300 million naira in the renovation of infrastructure of cattle farms. And Ekiti State government began of recent to also invest in banana exportation. So we have a number of states that they have been making efforts or making strides to get things done. So how do we ensure the sustainability of these projects? Because the reason I mention that is because, I mean, it's no news in Nigeria that every agenda is peculiar to the tenure. So once the tenure passes, the agenda also dies with it. So in a situation where an agricultural policy or an agricultural project has been embarked upon by a government, but that particular tenure cannot complete that project while in office, how can the law step in to make sure that these kind of projects do not just, they don't become a miscarriage in that sense?
Yes, well, government ideally should be seen as a continuous process. So government should be read in continuum ordinarily. But given the peculiarities of Nigeria, whereby we have various political parties and governors or political office holders having their different agenda. That is where the law also still comes in, through putting in place laws that tend to prevent actions that would lead to abandonment of a specific project. Will definitely go a long way to checkmate the abandonment of projects. So such laws should key in to an arrangement whereby a government taking over from another should also see it as an obligation to complete existing projects. So, and again, there should be a scorecard for it. There should be, yes, I think we should have there should be penalties where there is failure to continue an existing program.
So moving away from the government and the public sector for a while, let's talk about the private sector for a bit. So as much as the government is trying their best to get things done in the agricultural sector, it is a known fact, it is obvious that the private stakeholders are also making giant strides in this sector. So we see different initiatives from private sectors. For example, of recent, the Flour Milling Association of Nigeria, they partnered with some private institutions, and the aim of the project they are working on is such that about 800,000 farmers will be benefited at the end of the day. So how can we draw a better synergy between private stakeholders and the government? So how can they work hand in hand such that even if the government cannot continue certain projects, private stakeholders can take them on and sustain them? So what kind of processes can we put to play in that kind of situation?
To effectively promote private and public sector collaboration and partnership in agriculture, the government must appreciate the fact that the regulatory environment, that is the business environment in which the private sector can key in, should be such that it will accommodate their activities. For example, in terms of application or registration requirements, for perfection of title, to even engage in agricultural activities, such should be made seamless for the private sector. So by prioritizing the relationship and ensuring that there is the incentive for individuals, for companies, for different business organizations to venture into agriculture will be very important. So if the environment is conducive for them, if they are not exposed at risk, if the security situation is in the country is such that does not put their business at risk, then there is a tendency that private and public sector initiatives of collaboration will definitely be a success in the country.
So, speaking of legislations, legislative frameworks, and the host of them, Nigeria has quite a number of legislation that's regarding agriculture. And well, there's the Ruga bill. There's the Ruga bill. There are several others that are in the works for agriculture. But at the same time, we must put into cognizance the fact that just like policies, there are actually certain laws that do not find execution in the state of things. There are laws that seem like toothless bulldogs. For example, maybe not related, but there was a time I was going through the criminal code, and I found out that it is a crime in Nigeria to bury corpses, amidst in residential areas. But that is one particular law that is probably a toothless bulldog, because we see tons of graveyards right in front of people's houses. So what do we do? How about we probably look to somewhere else rather than making more legislations and making more legislations that hardly ever get executed or implemented? So is there an alternative to the legislative process that also enhances the implementation of policies?
Yes. Well, ideally, laws and policies should be mutually reinforcing in any climate. Nevertheless, in Nigeria, for instance, the challenge has been that of implementation. And the stark reality is there is a need for reorientation of Nigerians in respect of how we relate or how we implement the law as well as policies. So there should be the awareness or orientation to create or to change the values of it. So it's very important. So it's a problem of, it's a value system. And again, so what we are saying is that the leaders will have to change their orientation. Likewise, the people. So if we don't do that, then we are not ready until we implement or set in the targets to implement and realize all the goals we've set, be it in the law, be it in policy, before we can really make the headway. So there are no two ways to it. So there is a need to change the orientation, there is a need to change our value system in order for us to make the headway in the country.
Thank you very much, sir, for that. So, in changing our value systems, at least to me, it is safe to say, or it is an arguable point that the laws are, they, to an extent, failed in shaping the value systems of the people. So, what would be an alternative? Because education would have been an alternative, but it is rather sad that presently in primary and secondary schools, agricultural science is an elective. So it is only when you know the value of something that you can treat it as such. So it seems like every source of shaping value systems is being wiped out of the system. So where exactly is that solution? What is the area? Where do we turn to now? Now that the laws have failed, the educational system is beginning to bring down agriculture in terms of priority. So where are we headed? Where do we turn to now?
Well, it still boils down on the same value system and the commitment as a nation to change. So, and again, for there to be a change that will have positive impact, or that will change the value, that will give room for implementation without breaches, it means we re-evaluating ourselves, and still has to do with us changing our values. So there is no two ways we can go. It's either we agree to come together and change our values, or we make no headway. So there is no alternative beyond being disciplined and adopting best practices.
So speaking of best practices, I think agriculture, environment, climate change, these are issues that are beginning to have some sort of implications or consequences on each other. Our world, our planet, our beloved Earth is at the point where our littlest decisions on how we treat the environment determines how long it will last. So how can the law come in making sure that agricultural practitioners practice environment-friendly practices? For example, climate smart agriculture, toning down on deforestation, toning down on certain things that harm the environment, that drive climate change. So how can the law come in? Because there are quite a number of environmental laws, but we hardly see their impact on what the people do. So what can the law do to optimize people's consciousness of the fact that they need to pay more attention to the environment and treat it better?
Well, there are certain phenomena on law. And again, the law itself as an instrument can be viewed from two angles. That is, from the angle of the whip and the carrot. So the whip in the sense that for those who violate the law, the appropriate punishment should be meted on them. So there should be sanctions for non-compliance. And in another way around, so the sanctions should be such that it is adequate and sufficient enough to give room for behavioral change. On the other hand, sanctions may not work all the time. So another option would be incentives. So incentivize the activities that the law wants to achieve. So if you are to promote climate-friendly practices, then give persons or farmers the incentives to go along such plan. So if they get favorable incentives in the form of grants, in the form of tax waivers, that are sufficient enough to make them change their behavior, certainly, perhaps, that will definitely go a long way to reorientate the people and make them see reasons why they should imbibe or they shouldn't imbibe certain practices.
Thank you very much, sir. So finally, we see countries, developed countries whose agricultural sectors are, want to imitate, want to emulate, countries who hold their agricultural sector in so much esteem that for every single decision in governance they take the agricultural sector into consideration. So for example, when Britain was to leave the European Union, they took every aspect into consideration, including food production, food trade, quality of food and all of that. So are there lessons from certain countries or things that Nigeria should look out to imitate or look out to imbibe that will aid the development of agriculture through policy implementation and all?
Yes, still goes down to our values in the country. And this I will link this with the concept of the resource cost or the Dutch disease in Nigeria. Why? Agriculture was making a headway in Nigeria. All of a sudden, Nigeria discovered oil in commercial quantities in 1956. And thereafter commenced commercial operations in 1958. Unfortunately, Nigeria abandoned its agricultural sector for oil. So we focused on oil, forgetting that agriculture is also a gold mine in its own respect. So a way out is for us to go back to agriculture. So let's just say there is a need for economic diversification. So agriculture should be placed in its preeminent position. There are countries that have not really made that because of without favorable water conditions like Israel, Egypt, that have use irrigation, but that have explored various ways. Even Rwanda is doing that, and even in the areas of livestock farming. So much will need to be done in the country to replicate what has been done in other countries. Why? These are countries whereby the governments have ensured that agriculture gets the required grants, agriculture gets the required support. So we must revisit this very well in the country. For instance, the National Fertilizer Company of Nigeria was something to write home about in the past. But today, farmers still struggle to get the needed fertilizer. So what we are saying is that there is a need for capacity building, there is a need for infrastructural development, there is a need to improve in machineries. There is also the need for creation of avenue for sufficient incentives in the form of seed loans, grants, rebates for agriculture. So Nigeria shouldn't be importing at all because we have the land, we have the manpower. So it's best for us to refocus as a nation, prioritize agriculture in our national planning, and continue to project it. So this will go a long way to improve the agricultural sector in Nigeria.
Thank you very much, sir. So there we have it. It has been such an interesting discussion, a mind-enlightening one on law, implementation, and agriculture. Of course, as Dr. Peter has rightly said, the government does have its role to play. But as people of the nation, we should also work on our value systems because agriculture is our heritage, and agriculture is something that will be developed if we as people prioritize it. So thank you very much, sir, for having us, or thank you very much for giving us the audience and for coming on to have this interesting conversation with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
It has indeed been an interesting session discussing policy implementation, as is the focus of the National Agricultural Policy Project. So as we round off, once again, my name is Busayo Bakari, and this is the National Agricultural Policy Project.